Howdy. This video is about sleep hygiene, in particular focusing in on how we might shape our environment in order to facilitate more restful and deep sleep. I think of the different areas of sleep hygiene, this is probably the most challenging because it's tied to how we structure our space, which is sometimes connected to how much space we have access to. Some people are afforded the opportunity to have a separate bedroom, a separate workspace, a separate kitchen space and living space, and some people just have one space. And they might not even have control or autonomy over what choices are made in that space. So each of us is going to have to approach this work in our own unique way, bringing our own creativity to thinking about how we can structure our space or our time in that space in a way that's going to facilitate our sleep. This is all because sleep is pretty gosh darn important to our overall well-being. When we're talking about the environment, essentially what we're looking at is making sure that it's conducive to our sleep. And so we're going to address beddings, sleep and sex, and removing screens, which always feels a little controversial. Now that first part around beddings is going to be just ensuring that we're comfortable in that space. Thinking about the temperature, how much coverage we have, the type of weight that we appreciate on our bodies, comfortable pillows and blankets and pajamas that help us breathe and feel comfortable in that space. Before we invest and spend a lot of money, I encourage people to experiment with what they have on hand already. It could be taking some cushions off the couch and kind of experimenting with them, or multiple layers to create a weighted feel. And if you sleep in the same bed as someone else, this might require a certain amount of communication. And this also kind of opens up a piece of conversation, which I think is important, that we don't shame ourselves or others if we choose to sleep separately from a spouse. Because there might be differences in the type of environmental supports that we need when sleeping, there's nothing wrong with sleeping separately if that's something that we have access to, if we have another bed or if we have another room. It does not mean that we love this other person less. It just means that we kind of need different supports at different times. The second environmental consideration is around what we do in bed. That bed needs to be a secure space that is protected throughout the day, that we don't do other activities in bed, but instead bed is reserved for sleep and for sex. This means that we do not lay down in the bed during the day to watch TV or to read. We really want to protect that space as much as possible. Now I know I'm guilty of sometimes on a Saturday afternoon reading a little bit in bed and taking a quick nap if I have the time, but it's not an everyday activity. We're really trying to protect that space so that when we lay down in bed, our body is cued to go to sleep. If we're getting into bed, laying down and watching TV, or we're scrolling through our phone, or we're doing other activities, that can really start to confuse our body as to what that space is for. While sex might be very activating physiologically, very exciting, or hopefully it's exciting, it's still something that then is protected in that bed space. So sleep and sex, and that's it. And while I hope this makes sense to people and it seems like an easy thing to do to say, oh, well, I just won't use my bed for other things, it can be very hard because not everyone has a space in which they live where they can move away from their bed. That in fact, their bed might take up the whole room, and that might be the totality of the space that they have afforded to them. In those cases, we need to be thoughtful and creative about how we approach that. It requires a certain amount of creativity to find different tools and resources to use in order to facilitate a space that can be multifunctional, with the benefits of being able to associate bed with sleep pay off dividends when we go to bed at night. The third consideration I've alluded to already, which is the removing of screens. Ideally, we want to move our phones, screens like computers and televisions out of the room, out of the bedroom, away from the bed. So I encourage you to think about whether or not you can move your phone to another space away from your bed. Because that scrolling, that desire to check messages, it's hard to resist when we're in bed. And we don't want to wake up at 2 in the morning and start scrolling on Instagram. If we need to keep our phones by our bed, then turn them off or turn them to silent mode or turn them to do not disturb so that no messages come through. We live in a wonderful time where we can have a phone and only indicate who is allowed to break through our do not disturb. Make that update in your phone settings so that you can have your phone by your bedside but not have to check it, not get interrupted, unless it's an actual emergency. The same thing goes for laptops, tablets, or television screens. If we are watching video content in bed, we are actively activating ourselves. These screens send messages to our bodies that we should be awake, not only in the content, because what we're watching has been designed, has been written by professionals to attract attention, but also in just the mere fact that these things are shooting light at us. And there's lots of talk about blue light and non-blue light and blue blockers and all this stuff, and that's a wonderful discourse. And even on these settings where we're blocking certain types of light, we're still creating light in a space that's supposed to be dark for sleep. And so there are a number of people in my life who say, well, I've got the special glasses or I've got the special filters at night, so I should be fine, but they still are plagued by difficulties going to sleep. And I feel like kind of a jerk sometimes saying, well, you're shooting light at your eyeballs right before you go to sleep. Maybe that shift would be helpful. Having more indirect light, being able to focus on things that aren't glowing back at you. I don't want to be the good time police. So I acknowledge that some people are able to have a TV in their bedroom, are able to watch TV and fall asleep without difficulty. And I applaud them. And if it's working for you, then go ahead and keep doing that. And if it stops working, then think about adjustments. But I do want to make note of a challenge that many people run into if they have a television in the bedroom, even if it doesn't disrupt their ability to fall asleep, which is that I'll hear people say, well, I'm going to bed at a certain time, but I'm waking up tired. And when we look at their schedule and how they're going to sleep at night, it's that they're going to bed. In other words, they're getting into bed at one time, watching TV, and not actually trying to go to sleep until much later. So if they're getting to bed at 10 and going to wake up at 6, that's wonderful. It's 8 hours of sleep. But they're getting into bed and watching TV for 2 hours. And so it's important to think about, how is this shaping or reshaping my sleep schedule? There are no hard and fast rules with this. There's no everyone must do this, or everyone needs to do this, or you should do this. What it is an opportunity for us to be really intentional about this, to examine what's going on in our environment, to make choices, to gather data, to adjust and zhuzh as necessary, and really experiment with what's going to work best for us. And we get feedback every day, because every day we're going to sleep at night, we're waking up in the morning, unless we're working third shift. And so therefore each day we have a data point to feed back in, to understand and to make shifts. Because gosh darn it, sleep is important. And with that, I'm real grateful that you watched this video, and thanks so much. Be well.